In Sudan, let me bring in Africa analyst Izak Khomo. Ntate Khomo, thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's pick up where Desiree left off in terms of the international response to what's happening in Sudan. We see Saudi Arabia currently a country that's very much involved in terms of Sudan. They said they are watching developments there with great concern and pushing for dialogue. We heard, I saw a post by the U.S. security advisor, John Bolton, calling the situation there in terms of the violence abhorrent. The Sudanese people are at a critical juncture, you would agree, in their country's history. Do you see anytime soon a peaceful transition to civilian rule? Well,
as the situation lies now, it won't be immediate, but it could be immediate if the international organization, through the AU, they actually come with a carrot and stick sort of approach, whereby the AU is calling for dialogue between the two organizations. But if you can see that dialogue was going on, but then the military now has actually changed tact, and they're actually forcing, they're going through using force. And that took place after the military leaders went to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. Now that's where you find that those are the most important players right now. They are the handlers of the military, basically.
I see. Just talked about this military council. How powerful are they? How organized are they?
They're very powerful. I mean, to say they've got the arms in their hands, but again, now they do not have the credibility amongst the people. No, that's the thing there. And with that, there was the talks with the Front for Freedom and Change, and those talks actually sort of dragged, and the military would not relent. What the civilian side was actually demanding that the transition period of 2 years, which they had agreed upon, should be headed by the civilians. But you find that Al-Burhan and Hemedi, the two generals who are heading the military council, they went to Saudi Arabia, they went to Emirates, their supporters, and when they came back with this situation of actually sort of breaking down the protest. And now that itself is frightening, because these two people have been working with the Saudis. It's a very big story that basically when al-Bashir changed allegiance from Iran to Saudi Arabia.
Ntate Khomo, could you just stand by, hold that thought? I want to just take you back now to Desiree Chauke, who's in Sandton, Johannesburg, and she's with a very interesting guest, the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan. Desiree, back to you.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for coming to us here. We're at the Hilton, the Africa Summit and Leadership Conference 2019. Several guests here. We spoke to the chairperson of the Universal Peace Federation earlier, but right now we're pleased to say we're joined by the former president of the Republic of Nigeria, former President Goodluck Jonathan. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you and good morning.
What's the significance of your attendance here today?
As you recall that just barely 3 weeks I was here.
I was going to get to that.
During the election, I led the ISA observation mission. And for me to come back, that means that we take this conference seriously. And the issue of the leadership conference is significant in the continent, because we know that so many countries within our continent need to do things differently. And it is during such conferences where we share experiences, discuss issues, that we encourage our leaders to begin to do things differently. So I'm quite pleased, and that is one of the reasons I have to come.
You're talking about doing things differently, and one of the biggest stories on the continent right now are events unfolding in Sudan. What do you make of what's happening in that country?
Well, the situation in Sudan makes all of us sad. Both Sudan and South Sudan, we're expecting to be done better. But one thing that is clear, leaders in Africa no longer support military governments. So what we'll advise that the military, if the issues are terrible, and they intervene to bring peace to that country, they should make sure they hand over to a civilian. The idea of military rule is no longer in vogue all over the world. So I believe AU is taking the right steps. I think they have pronounced some sanctions. I hope they should not push AU to take up to the UN, where comprehensive sanctions will be given and the citizens will suffer. So we advise, or we suggest to the military leaders there that please, it has happened in other countries too. Burkina Faso, I was personally involved in resolving that of Burkina Faso. The military took over. ECOWAS said no. Of course, they handed over to a civilian to run for some months and elections were conducted. So we advise the military leaders there to hand over to a civilian that will be accepted by the civil society and other leaders to run the country for a few months. And elections are conducted. We will no longer allow a situation where our countries are governed by extreme dictatorial methods.
Your Excellency, I hear you talking a lot about meting out advice. But what's the role of former leaders such as yourself, practical role in bringing about peace on the African continent?
Yes, I'm here. It's one of the roles we play. We've headed our countries before, and after you step aside, you may no longer be too active in the continental and subcontinental bodies.
Really?
But occasionally they involve us. And this is one of the reasons why I'm here. Occasionally they involve us, but we expect the presidents of the various countries in the East African region and of course the AU to intervene.
What is the role of former presidents? Here in South Africa, we have a big debate right now about the remodeling the mandate of the South African Reserve Bank, our central bank. And the former president has used social media to come into the fray and take part in that conversation. Mr. Jacob Zuma, what are your thoughts on such?
The former presidents can have best advice based on their experience. In some countries, there are constitutional rules. In Nigeria, former presidents are members of what we call Council of State, that occasionally the president call a meeting involving them to take certain decisions on some critical issues that affect the nation. Yeah. But at the continental level, there is no defined role for former presidents. But former presidents still play roles. Because I know even when I was in office, people like President Obasanjo, from time to time, used to go and speak to AU on some issues. So it's mainly advisory. And sometimes they give you some responsibilities. But if they don't give you specific responsibilities, you may not just jump on them.
Yeah. Nigeria has also had challenges in terms of the banking sector. This is unprecedented. You're stopping an interview on air, sir. We're live on air. All right, Your Excellency, I understand that you are time tied, so I'm gonna have to let you go. But just on a last note, you've just been to South Africa, as you said, to conduct oversight in terms of the elections, and you asserted as a chairperson that the elections were free and fair. Are you happy with events that, as you see them unfold in South Africa, coming out of that election?
Well, I've not been following up, so I may not know details. But one key thing for all of us who came to observe the elections, that the stakeholders, political parties, all of them expressed confidence in the Independent Electoral Commission. They expressed confidence in the security. And when you have confidence in these two, then you have solved most of the problems. Yes, at the end of election, you will not expect people not to be aggrieved. People may be aggrieved in one way or the other. But on the overall, the elections were free.
Let's release you to go take part in the beginning of the proceedings. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
The former president of the Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency, Mr. Goodluck Jonathan.
Well done for holding on to the former president there, Desiree. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting. I guess it's an important conversation to have. Today, Izak Khomo is still with us, Africa analyst. You heard from the former Nigerian president, Goodluck Jonathan, saying that leaders in Africa no longer support military government. AU suspending Sudan with immediate effect. Do you think that this is the only way to solve this crisis?
Well, I think the AU is very weak as far as that solving the crisis. I mean to say that if you look at our present chairman of the AU, Sisi, I mean, he's from Egypt. Well, when he was in the military, he overthrew a democratically elected government. Yeah. And the AU, what did he do? It suspended Egypt, but he's back. He has formed a party and is there. But I mean, the original sin has been done. There's a government which has been overthrown. So the AU basically in itself is not very strong. It has got to get some very strong international players who will weld the stick.
But do you not think that taking this sort of action by suspending a country with immediate effect until there's establishment of a civilian-led transitional authority, wasn't that decisive?
No, it's decisive, and it's a very good issue because you're actually indicating that you're not happy with what has happened. But that's not the most important thing, because just suspending Sudan, it won't actually sort of drive the military council to actually sort of taking the necessary step of bringing in a civilian government. Yeah, somebody's got to weld a stick at it, and that is actually the domain of the UN. Yeah, but the AU has got to lead the UN to that point.
Well, let's talk about that. The primacy of an African-led initiatives in order to solve the crisis that's currently happening in Sudan. Do you underline that as a key component?
It's a key component, yeah, but the Africans should take ownership of the problem. Yeah, and to give a very good example is that the Libyan problem. The Libyan problem is actually, it's out of African hands. Yeah, it has been taken over by not even the UN, it's been taken over by the EU. But the main players there, the spoilers, it's the GCC countries. When I talk of the GCC, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and they've also captured Egypt. Egypt is playing a very negative role in Egypt, in Libya. And that the danger is that that thing could be replicated in Libya. So the AU has got to have certain leverage whereby they're going to actually stamp the authority. And they can't get that leverage unless they actually bring in the Security Council.
Right.
Yeah, the Security Council has got to play a very important part.
Okay, suspension now. If that doesn't work, what's the options left to the AU? Boots on the ground, possibly?
Well, the boots on the ground, no, that's not an option. That's not an option, because boots on the ground are going to overthrow a government. Yeah, the option is this: that sanctions.
Peacekeeping missions?
No, peacekeeping. They've got to have a peace deal first. Peacekeeping, they just don't take place. Yeah, both sides have got to agree. There's got to be a peace agreement, and then that's when you get a peace agreement. Out of the peace agreement, you've got a Chapter 7, but that Chapter 7, it actually takes the decision of the Security Council. But forget about the military. The way to go about it is the sanctions. And with sanctions, we've got to bring in the Security Council, or the contact groups. They have got to be roped in, and they've actually got to be roped in behind the drive to get in a civilian government. But now there you've got the Saudis. Yeah, the Saudis have got an agenda of actually sort of having this big a suzerainty over the Sahel right up to the Atlantic. They've said so, and they've actually talked about having an army which is going to come and face the terrorist threat that's coming up in the Sahel. Yeah, and Egypt said they wanted the army to be based in Egypt itself. But look, that is the danger, you see.
Look, we've been talking about the mounting international pressure on Sudan in order to stop the violence in that country. How important is it for the international community to speak in one voice in order to bring both parties to the table for negotiation?
It's very important. Yeah, that's why the UN have taken a very good step in saying that the whole thing will be driven by the AU. Now, the AU has got to drive that thing there. And when they come to a decision, they go back to the United Nations, to the Security Council. And that's where South Africa is going to play a very important part, because we've got to sit there to actually request the UN to actually come in with the big stick, be it sanctions, be it whatever. And that thing there could actually work. And sanctions also to force the Saudis, the GCC countries, to keep out of that problem.
South Africa is no doubt watching the political and stability issues in Sudan very, very closely as the incoming AU chair. What sort of role does Pretoria play in this?
A very important role, not even the incoming chair. The most important thing is that we have got We've got a seat at the Security Council. And this issue, whatever it is, the decisive things will come from the Security Council. And that's where South Africa plays a very, very important part. The South African DIRCO is going to play a very important part between its UN representative and the AU, and also the deputy chair of the AU. So the whole thing, South Africa is central to getting a solution to that problem in Sudan.
We have reports that the protesters don't trust the military. They're fearful, most of them. I guess for any prospect of meaningful negotiations, the violence has to stop.
Yes, the violence has to stop from the military. But again, now there's a very big danger. Now, if you look at the whole thing internally, there's a danger that now the wars which have been fought in the Nuba Mountains, in Blue Nile area, and also in Darfur, they're actually now going to come, they're going to move to the riverine areas, into Khartoum, Omdurman, and up to the Nuba areas up north. Yeah, because you find that for the first time, not even for the first time, the Janjaweed group, then the Rapid Deployment Force, basically the Janjaweed paramilitary forces. Now they've actually gone and attacked people in the riverine areas. So you find for the first time that the people in the central areas of Sudan, they have got the support and their unison with the rebel groups. And that actually is the thing that the rebel groups really wanted, to actually have a foothold within the riverine areas. And that actually shows that the struggle about the war in Sudan, it will actually sort of spread.
Yeah. Look, surely the protesters, the opposition groups, their resolve will no doubt be tested in the next couple of months. I mean, rising bread prices, cash shortages, these were all triggers that kicked off sustained protests against Umar al-Bashir. Do you think, from what you're hearing on the ground, from what you're reading, do you think that the people on the ground have enough energy, enough will, enough resolve to keep going?
I think they do have that. Now that with what happened, they do have that. They've seen that power is within their grasp. They'll never give it up. But then you find that the protest began with economic hardship, with the protests against food prices and things like that. Now you find that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they've given the Sudanese government $200 million dollars to actually ease the food crisis, and they've promised them $1 billion US dollars. So you find that the Saudi Arabia are trying to stabilize, to stabilize, to strengthen the military, to actually have a hold on the country by actually trying to solve some of the economic problems which has brought the people on the street. So Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are playing a very negative role, and that should actually be checked by the international organization.
No doubt we will be following this story very closely. It is a developing story, but we thank you very much, Izak Khomo, for coming in and giving us your perspective on the situation in Sudan. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
All right, that was Izak Khomo. He is an Africa analyst. We're going to take a quick break to get you more news next. Stick with us.